Hey everyone, my name is Attila Kiss. I'm a software developer at Adyen, and I'm here today to talk about 3DS2, not just in general, but how we implemented it in our Magento 2 plugin. At first, I would like to ask who in the audience have ever heard about PSD2 or 3DS2 and maybe already implemented it into their solution? Please raise your hands if you did. Yeah, I cannot see too many hands in the air. Actually, it's supposed to, or were kicking into the, like on September 14th, the whole PSD2 and 3DS2. But fortunately, it was delayed. So don't stress, guys. It's not a big problem that you haven't implemented yet or haven't heard about this, directive. Because you still have time. We don't know how much, but you do. You do still have time. Anyway, please start looking into it. Let's educate yourself and let's try to implement it as soon as possible, because it's not just like a law that you have to do it in Europe, but it's also beneficial not just for your merchants, but also for your customers. At first, then let's see what is PSD2. PSD2 is an EU Payment Service Directive, which requires all European merchants to have strong customer authentication for all transactions, which is basically really nice because then it adds like an extra security layer for all the transactions. What is 3DS2? This is a next generation industry standard that was developed by the issuers and the EMV Co. And enables the merchants to have a really frictionless integration and really high security. So yeah, as I was saying, it's supposed to kick in 14th of September, but you still have time. It's delayed in Poland, UK, but for example in Sweden, it's not. So if you have merchants or if you accept payments in Sweden, then you have to be prepared. Let's see what we had before, or we still have it because it's like a transaction period that we still have the 3DS1, the old integration, and we have the 3DS2. The 3DS1 is the old way to authenticate using web redirects to the issuer banks, which means that whenever the customer does the payment, and they enable the 3DS1 integration, and also the merchant enables it, then the customer is going to be redirected to the issuer bank. They have to do the authentication process, which is usually like a static password and username checking, and then they are going to be redirected back to the merchant's website. So basically it breaks the whole user experience, the whole user flow for the checkout. Also, you don't have control over the redirect, so you basically just get back a URL. You have to redirect the customer to that URL, and then who knows what happens. Of course, the issuer bank knows it, but you don't have control over it. Also, the authentication is often done with static username and password, which the customer needs to remember. And we don't really want the customer to have this much effort in the authentication process. It's much nicer if they just get like a push notification, they just need to accept it on their phone, or if they just have to put like a PIN, or even they just use their biometric data like fingerprint, and then all the authentication is done. Also, since the banks are usually not that fast to integrate the latest trends, latest technologies, not even the latest, but it's just mobile friendliness. So it's usually not mobile friendly, this redirect page is not mobile friendly, or not mobile ready. And also it's not native in the checkout, so you will break the whole flow anyway for the customer. Because of these reasons, you have like an increased drop-off rate, and the conversion is also not the best. And you can also just see like an example that how it can look like. You can see it's not really a nice design, doesn't blend in to the whole checkout flow. What about 3DS2? 3DS2 is the new shiny way to authenticate your customers. It's like a really strong one because it authenticates the user twice. At first, it happens in the background. This is like checking the device information, checking the browser information, and based on these data, they can decide if they want to trigger an extra authentication layer for the customer or not. This extra authentication layer can be the fingerprint or the one-time password, as I just said before. It's like all the transactions are routed through this whole authentication. So this is happening even if the user does not enable it specifically for their issuer bank. 3DS1, you had to, as a customer, you had to enable it, and it was not done by default for all the transactions. For the 3DS2, it will be, or it is already done for all the transactions in the EU. Also, it helps for an effortless customer experience, but as an effortless customer experience, usually for the developers, it's not that easy to integrate the whole flow. Because of these reasons, you get an increased auth rate, you get a better conversion, because all the transactions are routed through this whole security authentication flow. It reduces the fraud rate, so it also helps not just for the customer to authenticate, but it helps the merchant to pay less for the fraud. It's fully PSD2 certified and built by the issuers and EMBCO company. And also you can see it on the right that it fully blends into the checkout. It's almost fully customizable, not totally fully. You cannot see it, the laser. So basically, this is an iframe which is rendered in the checkout. You cannot customize that which is in the iframe, but everything outside of the iframe can be customized and can be fully integrated into your checkout. I brought a video which shows you how it looks like in an example store. Basically, you put your products into the basket, you go to the checkout, you choose the card payments, you fill in your card details, and after that, the 3DS2 triggers. You are not redirected to anywhere, to the issuer website or anywhere else. It just simply shows in the checkout, and you can see it's pretty customized, pretty stylish, and looks good. The customer just needs to authenticate himself, and the payment is done. You can see the success page. But yeah, as I just mentioned, usually with better customer experience, the developer's work is much more. So 3DS2 becomes a bit more complex than 3DS1 was before, because it's not just a redirect as it was. This is much more rendering iframes, checking the data coming from the issuer bank. Like, as I said, it's not just a redirect. So how it looked like before and how it looks now. Before, with the 3DS1, we just had the authorized redirect shopper refused an error result code from the Adyen payment processor gateway. This basically means that the authorized is a successful payment. The redirect shopper is 3DS1, so you have to redirect your customer. Refuse or error is an error or a refused from the issuer because the payment, something went wrong, the address was not correct, the name was not correct, the CVC was not correct, something went wrong. With the 3DS2, we had to implement and we had to introduce the identify shopper and the challenge shopper, which is the third one. The identify shopper, it has the idea behind that the issuer bank needs to render an iframe in your checkout flow. It's usually like a 1 pixel iframe, which simply just gathers the data from the checkout, from the device that the customer uses, or the browser also that the customer using for the checkout. After it's done, the issuer sends an async notification to your backend, which you have to handle at first, and after that you handled it, you have to notify your front end about this notification. It's basically you have to pull the data from your backend, from the front end. It's not an easy job, so that's why we, at Adyen, we introduced the checkout components, the 3DS2 checkout components, which you can simply implement into your front end. It will handle all the asynchronous notification because we implemented the 3DS2 process into Adyen's core fully, so you don't have to handle any notification regarding the FreeDS2 in your backend, and you don't have to pull from your front end and showing the data. And also, you don't really have to take care about rendering the iframe or doing anything else than just rendering our component on the front end. What about the challenge shopper? The challenge shopper has the same idea as the identify shopper. The issuer bank, like just using an iframe, it's not a 1 pixel iframe, it's a bit bigger, will render the challenge for the customer. This is usually can be like a biometric, like opens an app, opens the bank application and asks for the authentication, or can be like a one-time password that the bank sends you the SMS and you just have to type that code in it. And then basically you're done. I mean, the customer is done. You as a developer, you're not, because again, the issuer bank is going to send the asynchronous notification to your backend. You have to pull your data from your front end, and then whenever everything is done, you get the result code. You can redirect the shopper to the success page, or to the error page, or to the refuse page, so basically an empty card, or whatever you prefer. So this is the idea behind the FreeDS2 decisioning. It's not that easy to implement natively, but it's much easier if you just use the checkout components that we can provide. Let's see the technical flow. At Adyen, at first, if you want to do a payment, you have to do an initial payment call. In the initial payment call, you send all the payment details for what the customer wants to pay, how much is it, what payment method, what is the currency, and all the required details that the actual payment method requires. After that, let's say that we have a FreeDS2 full process, full flow, with the identify shopper and the challenge shopper. So at first we get back the identify shopper. On the front end you render the iframe, you gather the data, and then you can send back a payment details call to Adyen with all the results that the front end gathered. After that, Adyen and the scheme and the issuer does some magic in the backend and sends back a result, which in this case is the challenge shopper. With the challenge shopper, you do the same. You render the iframe on the front end. You gather the data from the customer. Basically, you do the authentication flow. And then you send back all the results that the challenge shopper component provides you to the payment details call. After this, you can get back the authorized, the refused, or the error result codes. And then you can redirect the shopper through the checkout process. Basically, you are done. So let's see how this integration is done in the Adyen's Magento 2 plugin. This is the default payment integration. In the default payment integration, you don't have to do multiple API calls. You basically just do one API call, which is the payments call. You send the details, and if it was authorized, then you can create the order. If it was canceled, something went wrong, or it's simply refused, you can simply just redirect the customer to an error page, and the order is not necessarily being created. We choose not to create the order if the payment did not went through. This is how it looks like. And as you can see on the right, at first the user clicks on the place order button, then we do the payments call, and after that the order is created. How it looks like in the FreeDS2 process. As you can see on the right, a few more endpoint calls just appeared, and also the payments call jumped to the first place, basically switched places with the place order. Why is it necessary? Basically in Magento 2, if you start the place order flow, then you cannot do more API calls, you cannot keep the customer on the front end and ask more interactions, but it will just go through like a process, and then the customer will be redirected somewhere. That's why we had to, at first, override the place order function on the front end, basically preventing the default functionality, and then just do our API call to the Magento backend and sending all the payment details. How this, yeah, this one is not really nice. Sorry, I created the presentation in Keynote and not PPTX. That's tech. Anyway, you can see it in the request on the top that the allow FreeDS2 is true. With this one, we tell Adyen that the native implementation is done on the front end, so they can send back not the native, not the redirect FreeDS2 method, but the native one. Also, you can see some browser information. This is necessary for the checkout components to know that how they can be rendered. The response, you can see a result code, which is identify shopper. So we are going to use the identify challenge, the identify FreeDS2 component. And also you can see a token, which makes our life, the developer's life, much more easier because you don't have to take care about the iframe rendering. You don't have to take care about any other details. You just use this token for the component. And as you can see, we expose a new API endpoint, the V1 Adyen payment in our plugin. So you can simply use it also for your PWA integration if you want to headless integrate our plugin with other front ends. So what we do next in the front end? In the front end, we render the FreeDS2 component, the identify shopper component, and we simply feed that token into the component. With this token, the component knows what needs to be rendered. The issuer iframe is being rendered. The issuer gathers all the data, and in the backend, as I said before, all these magic happens. So the issuer does its calculations based on more than 100 data points, and then redirects back and sends back the asynchronous notification to the backend. After that, we just created an onComplete callback. So whenever all these calculations are done, you get back, you can just listen to this onComplete callback, and whenever you're done, you can pass back the result to the Magento backend again. In the Magento backend, you just have to feed the fingerprint result and the payment data in a request, and then Adyen is going to respond with the challenge shopper, or if the challenge shopper is not necessary, then authorize, refuse, or error. But in this case, the challenge shopper is being triggered. Again, you can see the same token is being sent back, a challenge shopper token. The idea is the same as with the identify shopper component. You just have to pass it into the component, and the component is going to be rendered. We are going to render the issuer's challenge to the customer, and they can do the whole the authentication. On the top, you can see a model. We just chose to show the whole challenge in a model, so we used Magento's default model for this. We also disabled the clickable overlay and the buttons because we don't want the customer to go anywhere else before authentication. Yeah. And then we simply send back the results. Again, after the onComplete callback is called, we just send it back to the Adyen backend. How this looks like, we do the place order basically after this. Why we need to trigger the place order after this API call? Because if we don't do that, then we will not have the chance to start the original Magento functionality. So before sending back all the details, we have to start the place order functionality. So we just get back to this place order deferred object, and then simply start the place order. In the backend, we again construct a request based on the challenge result and the payment data, and we send it back to Adyen. Adyen will respond with the PSP reference and the result code, authorized, refused, or error. And basically, that's it. You can get your customer to the success page, and the order can be created. I hope it helped to understand the whole FreeDS2 process, how the authentication needs to be done, how the whole flow looks like. If you have any more questions, we have a booth in the hall. Please come and find us and ask questions, talk to us. And also, if you want to know more about FreeDS2, we have a support page. If you just Google Adyen FreeDS2, you will get a lot of useful information And yeah, do we still have time? 10 minutes. Yeah, I wanted to keep 10 minutes for questions. So thank you for the attention, and I'm waiting for the questions. Yes?
So I saw a couple of the code of the JavaScript, right? Some of the errors were just logged in the console. Instead of purpose, like, I guess that's the initiation of the request. But in case of any problems, the customer won't see anything, right?
Exactly. We created the plugin so the merchants still needs to do some customizations on it. So however you choose to notify the customer that something went wrong, you can implement it on your own. Also, the Identify Shopper and the Challenge Shopper component are just part of the whole flow. So it's, if something goes wrong, then it's more of our or the merchant's problem, and the customer suppose just needs to be notified with an error message or something. We didn't implement that. So it's up to the merchants and up to the system integrators to implement it. Yes?
Maybe I missed something, but you didn't explain more about how this Identify Shopper context appears. What is taken in place, how it is verified, because Challenge Shopper is obvious, we have some method of authentication. But when the Identify Shopper status is completed to, follow this process that you always have to your authorization in your browser or your mobile phone or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Identify Shopper, if I got your question right, the Identify Shopper is just gathering data for the issuer bank. It's the iframe renders a JavaScript file. The JavaScript file gathers all the data that the issuer thinks of and going to use for the authentication, but it's mostly really just device data that, for example, I will just try to give you an example, that if you already use your phone for payment and you already went through the whole authentication process, then probably the issuer has its fingerprint in their system. So they know that the device can be trusted, maybe for 1 week, maybe for 2 weeks, but just for a certain time period. And after this fingerprint can be generated again during the Identify Shopper component rendering, or the iframe is gathering the data, and then they regenerate this fingerprint, and they find a match. Then they will know that this shopper does not need to be challenged because the devices already can be trusted.
So this is not something that this iframe or something is storing some kind of a key authentication token, nothing like that. It's just
they generate it.
Analyze to process all the data that is sent, and during the processing they decide if it's authorized or not.
Exactly, but to be honest, it's up to the issuer. So how they choose it to be done. All the issuers are different.
Okay, I have one more question.
Yeah.
It's about customer mental approach to this process. Because, for example, for me, I'm a aware user of the payment methods, so I know that, for example, if I'm buying on some store and during the checkout process I am redirect to PayPal or some kind of service that I trust. Mm-hmm. So what about this kind of option when we have a shop? For me, I will never provide any of the credit card data to the new shop that I find on the internet when I see that they have processing this data. So I'm not as sure, I know that market, so I know that developers are different and they have a lot of difference in the skills in terms of processing data and so on. So I would be afraid to authorize that method if I'm not able to check how and who will be processed that data. Do you have some experience or information how customers can achieve some kind of insurance that this data is provided well by the some regulated company or something like that?
It's a good question. As you just said, it's a mentality, like a customer mentality. There are countries who are more happy to share these details, or they are not really afraid, and there are countries who are still like stick to like bank transfer and other secure payment methods. You're right that if I'm on a web shop in a checkout flow and I see that I need to provide my card details, I'm also a bit insecure about it and going to think about that, who is going to process my data, because it's just like a no-name web shop and I put my raw card details, then basically everyone can steal it. At Adyen we provide the card components for it, which means that we render it again just in an iframe, which means that the merchant is not aware that what are the raw card details, and we just encrypt it, send it back, and provide it to the merchant. But this is not an answer for your question, because it's more like how to ensure the customer that
stores just don't want to, or just have some problems with that this authorization method came out and the people don't know how to process it, or have some I don't know customer service calls, what is going on and so on.
I don't have. I'm on the developer side, so I don't really face with these issues. But basically what you can do is showing that who's your payment processor, this payment is processed by, for example, Adyen or other payment processor, whoever you use, and then you can build up some trust. But at the end, to be honest, you cannot really make sure that this is really rendered by that trusted partner, because you can simply just copy-paste and recreate the whole lookalike. And a normal customer, so who is not a developer, they will never be aware that they just put these details into an input field or into an iframe and an input field.
There is also Pci Compliance, which can be used.
In that case, if someone wants to cover the whole raw data processing, they need to be Pci compliant. If they want to process payments through Adyen or through other payment providers rendered by like a card component or something like that, then they don't need to be Pci compliant, because then they don't process raw card details.
Okay, I have just a quick question about this redirection. Is PSD2 means that we don't have any more redirection on all the websites, or just one kind of implementation? You did it for Adyen, but there might be possibility that PSD2 will be still with the redirection on the authentication.
The best implementation is a native implementation, which means no redirects. But there is still the redirect at first fallback, because not all the issuers are done with the FreeDS2 and the PSD2 implementation. So at first there's still FreeDS1 fallback, and if you don't want to, for some reason, if you don't want to implement the native flow, then you can still have the redirect FreeDS2 as well. That's still a possibility. Any more questions? I think we don't more. Oh, yeah.
Because here we were talking about front end, right? And in some cases, you can have the payment flows triggered from the back office of the system. Is the flow exactly the same, or it's not supported, or how does it work?
What do you mean in the back of? Oh,
you can create orders from the back office of the system, right? From the administration part of Magento.
In that case, your request is totally different, and then you can tell, for example, Adyen that this is a Moto payment method. This is created by the back office. But the FreeDS2, for example, at us, it's not yet implemented for the backend orders.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone have a question? In that case, thank you for the attention.